Good morning, folks. It's Richard Palmer here from the Fair Job Network. Just a quick update today. I thought I'd just give a little bit of a response to some feedback that I had on an article I wrote as CJ Strachan that was published in the Daily Skeptic last week. And before I go into the feedback, I just want to stress that I think it's very, very important that those of us in the resistance, and I put those quote marks around what is and should be quite a broad church, i.e. those of us who object to the politicization of everything, those who object to the interference of activists in people's day-to-day lives, those who object to the implementation of radical policies and ideas onto an unsuspecting population. We tend to be quite individualistic. We tend to be the dissenters in society. We are the ones who stand up and are countered. We are the ones who are seen as problematic. Now, one thing I will say is that we need to learn from the left. Yeah? And by the left, I'd mean the blob, the amorphous blob of individuals who push, for whatever reason, the agenda, the message on the rest of us. Okay? Now, one thing that the left understood a long time ago is the power of a broad church. Now, if you want to counter this as a dissident, you have to also understand the importance of a broad church. And this means that we've got to stop fighting and arguing amongst each other. And we've got to think about the actual goal. And that goal is long-term, permanent change in our society, a resetting of the values of our society back to what they used to be. Now, we can only achieve that if we stand together. And that means that we occasionally have to compromise our ideals and our ideas. So, onto the feedback. This particular article was part 2 of a 2-part series that I wrote for the Daily Skeptic under my pen name CJ Strachan. And this article, these 2 articles were examining where EDI came from. Why is it that so many companies and employers have jumped on the EDI bandwagon? Now, part 1 discussed the EDI becoming turbocharged during 2020 and the George Floyd protests. And this came about primarily because the boards of directors and CEOs of corporate organizations demanded that their HR departments did something to acknowledge what was going on. And this frequently involved the implementation of unconscious bias training, which of course has been completely debunked and should never be implemented on any organization outside of university research, and certainly not within a workplace environment, and also EDI of dubious quality. The second part 2 of the article, which was published last week, looked at where EDI comes from and how it's been pushed through ESG. So this is environment, social responsibility, stroke social justice, and governance policies. Now, we all know about the Bond villain Klaus Schwab sitting in the WEF, the World Economic Forum, having built the zeitgeist of ESG scores, where individual organizations can be judged on how ESG they are, on how compliant they are to ESG, to make sure that they're enforcing the what could probably be called the globalist monoculture agenda that we've seen, and they've been very open about enforcing. So there's no conspiracy there. They've been very open about this. ESG has entered our corporate world and our public sector world. And it's imposed on SMEs and on other companies through the investment process. So if you are a large organization, you wish to borrow funds or invest in or get some investment from a fund, then more often than not, that fund may have an ESG element to it. And in order to secure either the funding or favorable terms, you have to demonstrate that your organization has a high ESG score. And as you can imagine, this process is very susceptible to abuse by those with very specific political agendas. It doesn't take very many people, very many activists to bring a society crashing down. Any student of the Bolshevik Revolution will understand this. What it does take is a compliant managerial class who don't ask questions, who think that they are doing the right thing for the right reasons. And this is where and how ESG has become ubiquitous, together with its child EDI or DEI in the workplace. Now, this was the point of my article, was essentially to remind people that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and the managerial class who waved people like Lenin into power, and who drank the Bolshevik Kool-Aid, had no comprehension of what the consequences of that would be, because they hadn't, first of all, listened to Lenin, and secondly, they hadn't actually thought through what those consequences could be. And we see the same situation in our workplace, albeit on a not quite as consequential, but also significant scale. HR departments tend to be peopled by people who are very compliant and very much dedicated to following rules. Now, the problem with this personality type is that they tend not to be the mavericks. They tend not to be the ones who ask the questions. They're the doers rather than the thinkers. That's not to mean to say that they're stupid. Of course they're not. But they focus on the end goal, and they're very trusting of the people who are telling them what to do. And they're the ideal enforcement tool for any policy that any organization wishes to bring forward. So one bit of feedback that I did get was from somebody who responded to a tweet that Toby Young put out when he shared my article. And it's probably worth reading out, just because it demonstrates my point about understanding where we are and how we function and work together as a resistance to the message. So this was from a chap on Twitter. He said, "Ask yourselves why this Marxian inbred, i.e. me, is so very eager to fundamentally characterize the DEI agenda. Firstly, at no point does C.J. Strachan mention that it is cultural Marxism. Secondly, this lefty moron, that's me again, which is quite hilarious really, believes that the DEI agenda is well-intentioned. For your information, the aim of cultural Marxism is the complete destruction and annihilation of Christianity, conservatism, and whiteness. The DEI agenda is intended to generate endless oppression narratives designed to demonize white people. Learn about hyper-racist concepts like critical race theory, intersectionality, and progressive stack, where straight white men are placed at the pinnacle of oppression. We are witnessing a full-on cultural and ethnic genocide, UN definition, population replacement on a biblical scale, and the remaining population mass indoctrinated to self-hate, forced to view their whole existence as a nexus of oppression and systematically encouraged to embrace destructive and degenerative behavior. And yet this filthy, syphilitic lefty, that's me, is on social media dangerously portraying all this as if it's nothing more than virtue signalling doogism. Now, I'm struggling to understand, first of all, why he's so abusive of me. On no planet could I ever be described as a lefty. I think it's the first time I've ever been described as a lefty. And secondly, he misses a very important point in the article. The point in the article was not to discuss where all this came from originally. We know where it came from. We've been talking about this ad nauseum for decades now. Those of us who've been aware of this. And yes, cultural Marxism is a big part of it. And yes, you could say that, you know, the focus of the Comintern of the Soviet Union once Solzhenitsyn had pulled the curtain aside on the terror of that state was to focus on infiltrating the institutions in the West. Yes, we know all that. So what? That's happened. One thing I will tell you, though, is that the vast majority of people who are implementing these policies, they're not communists, they're not Marxists, they're not DEI obsessed, they're not activists. They're just normal people trying to do their job. So what exactly is your point? My point wasn't to say, you know, try and gloss over or deny where this has come from. I know where this has come from. But there's no point in us talking about this ad nausea, time and time again. What we have to do is to do something about it. Now, I'm doing something about it. What are you doing about it? And if you really think you're going to change society by alienating and assaulting those people who we need to get on side, those people who we need to educate over the dangers of what's happening here, then you might as well go and just stay in that mountain up in Arkansas you obviously live in. Because frankly, you're not going to change anything. All you're going to do is alienate people. And this brings me back to my point, which is that I don't necessarily disagree with anything he said there, apart from the personal abuse. However, what's the point of it? What's the point of his statement? We know that. You know, that's given. What are you going to do about it? That's the question. So what are you going to do about it? And one thing we shouldn't be doing is tearing each other apart. What we should be doing is recognizing that if we are going to fix our societies, we all need to pull together, put aside our personal differences, and understand that this is a long game that needs to be played strategically and cleverly. Thanks. There was a time, not so many years ago, when managing your business's HR was easy enough. Once a month, you'd pay your staff on time, you'd look after holidays, sick leave, pensions and other stuff. The only time the HR manuals were ever open was when you had to hire or fire someone. Life was straightforward and you could spend your time focusing on your business. But these days it seems like there's a never-ending cycle of HR crisis after HR crisis. From an increasing amount of red tape to demands you comply with the latest social justice movement to activist employees. How are you meant to manage all these competing demands that have nothing to do with a day job? It's hardly surprising that some days you might wonder why you got into business in the first place. There's an expectation that small businesses have the same legions of HR, lawyers and budgets for this sort of stuff that large employers have. There's also an expectation that you as a small business owner will understand the nuances and complexities of an increasingly complex employment law and Equality Act environment. This is incredibly unfair, time-consuming and costly. The problem is that if you get it wrong, and it's very easy to do this inadvertently, it might just end up costing you your entire business. That's why we set up Fair Job UK, the small business HR support service that allows you to get on with running your business. Join our increasing community of like-minded business owners and managers from all across the UK. It's considerably more affordable than you might think, and it may just be the best decision you made this year. Visit us at fairjob.co.uk or email contact@fairjob.co.uk.